are talking to Walter Day. Hello, Walter.
Hello, York.
So, you are known for being a pioneer in scores keeping for video games, actually.
Yes, in 1981, I opened up a video game arcade. It was called TwinGalaxies. It was opened up in a small town called Ottumwa, Iowa, in the United States. And the reason I opened up the arcade was because I loved playing video games so much that I opened up an arcade as an excuse to be able to play more and more video games. So I used to play the video games all night, it seems, for a couple of years with all the young people because I loved playing video games so much. But we were open for only 3 months when we suddenly discovered that no one was keeping track of the world records on video games. And so we volunteered to be the scorekeeper, and for some strange stroke of karma, the video game industry said, yes, you can be our scorekeeper. So we were the scorekeeper, supplying scores to the whole industry and verifying scores for Guinness Book of World Records. So we did that for many years. In fact, our organization still does exist today and still actively works on verifying world records. I personally am no longer connected to it because I finally retired to do my music, and also I'm making trading cards that commemorate the history of the global video game and pinball culture.
That's true. Actually, according to Wikipedia, you are also referred as a historian in video games.
Oh yeah, well probably somewhat because I focus on history a lot.
So you started this whole TwinGalaxies and chasing world record players and so on as a hobby, actually.
Yes, as a hobby because I love doing it so much. Because we were doing it for free just about the whole time, all 30 years or so. There was a period there where I stopped doing it for some years, but generally between 1980, 182, and today, almost everything I've been doing has been as a hobby. I don't seem to think in terms of the business because I have so much fun doing it.
But you did a lot more before. You actually even rented house or something for other people, and you did other stuff as well. What did you do before?
Well, what I do now, which I've also done over the same time, is I'm a landlord. So I have a landlord house where people are my tenants. And a long time ago, I used to be an oil broker. In other words, I'd buy and sell barrels of oil to like gas stations and stuff like that. And also, I used to sell old newspapers. Now that's interesting because when I say that, people think, oh, they start thinking of like last year's newspaper or last month's newspaper. No, I used to sell old newspapers. In fact, coincidentally, the oldest newspaper that I've ever bought and sold was from Germany, and it was from the year 1590.
Wow.
So it was 300 and what? 300 and almost 20 years old, approximately. 325 years old. So, and I used to have old newspapers from like 1705 from London and 1680 from Spain. And so I was a historian who used to specialize in selling old newspapers to history teachers. And they would use them in the classroom to illustrate or give the students the sense of what those ancient times felt like. Sort of like an inside view into the secret history of the times.
That's interesting. This means if you're interested into history and so on, you should also be pleased by the retro wave that kind of came along like 4 years ago, because nowadays retro gaming and arcade games and so on are suddenly hip, you know?
Oh yes, that's right. That's right. And what we're witnessing right now is a process that will cycle through. You know the word cycle through again and again and again. And later on, when you get older, your grandchildren are going to suddenly say to you, oh my God, have you ever heard of Donkey Kong and Pac-Man? Because they will suddenly become popular again, as the cycle repeats itself again, and your grandchildren suddenly start playing Pac-Man and Donkey Kong and Super Mario Brothers and SNES, and they'll think they're discovering it anew when it is only the cycle that repeats itself historically again and again and again.
So it's like fashion that repeats. It's like
Okay.
those big glasses frames from the 60s and 70s with a black frame that are suddenly hip and again. And we think, oh my God, my grandfather used to have such a glass frame. Why do you use it nowadays? Because it's suddenly hip again.
Exactly.
I see. So tell me a bit, how did you actually start liking video games and thought, okay, I build up a company called TwinGalaxies, and actually you even work together with the Guinness Book of World Records. So how did this all start, actually?
Well, it was 1980, and I was living in Houston, Texas. I was an oil broker. I would be on the telephone talking to big companies like Exxon, Conoco, Tenneco, British Petroleum, and I would try and do deals where I would sell oil from one company to the next and then get a commission. And it wasn't going very well. And a friend and I decided we would publish a book called Who's Who in the Petroleum Industry. It was going to be a reference book for the libraries. And one night, after we had been working on the biographies of the different petroleum famous people in the petroleum industry, my friend turned to me and said, "I can't do this anymore tonight. I have to go out and play Space Invaders." And I go, "What? Space Invaders?" And he took me to a very, very big arcade in Houston, out on the highway, out on the main road. And I discovered Space Invaders. And it became very, well, not addictive, but and I fell in love with Space Invaders. And I started playing it numerous times per week, many nights per week. And then I discovered Pac-Man, and then Centipede, and then other games like Make Tracks and Wizard of War. All these old legendary classic games. I fell in love with them. And wherever I would travel, see, then I stopped being an oil broker and I started selling my newspapers again, because I'd done that for many years. And so I'm traveling around the country, going to TV stations and newspapers and getting interviewed about my old newspaper selling company. But everywhere I went, I would stop and play video games at arcades. And even once, I had the TV stations come and meet me at the arcade while I showed them old newspapers. They would interview me in the arcade as I showed them old newspapers. So I really fell in love with video games, and I love video games too so much that I wanted to open up my own arcade. So that's what I did. I did it because I didn't think I'd make too much money, but because I wanted to play video games as much as possible. So I really loved them a long time ago. And I loved Donkey Kong and Gore and Galaxian and Red Baron and Tempest, Galaga, all these famous titles from 35 years ago. I knew them very well. I got actually pretty good at playing them. Now, the reason I got so good was because I had the best players in the world coming to TwinGalaxies after we started a scoreboard, and they taught me all their tricks.
That's actually interesting. If you realize that that nowadays the average gamer is like between 30 and 40, but back then, 30 years ago, it was most likely teenagers or almost beginning of the 20s, and you were actually one of the older players. I think you were around 30 or 35, around that.
Well, you're very intuitive. You're very, very alert, because that is something most people don't usually catch on. Most of the video game players back in 1981 to 85, they would mostly be between 10 years old and maybe 22 years old. And then, of course, there were older people playing and there were some women playing, but 90% of the people playing video games were between like 10 and 22. And I was 32, okay? I was 32 and I was the oldest. So I could genuinely say, I could correctly say that I was the best over 30 video game player in the world back when I was hanging out with all the star players and they were teaching me all their tricks. No one my age could have beat me because I knew all the tricks.
So, yeah, seriously, that's interesting. Actually, you are featured in quite some movies. For example, the King of Kong, A Fistful of Quarters, and actually in that movie you appeared more like a moderator, but it was not mentioned for any second that you're actually a player too.
Most people, well, as the years have gone on and I've gotten older, playing a video game does require a lot of focus, a lot of energy, a lot of time. And if you want to break a record, you really have to pay the price and practice a lot. The amount of work that I do, doing the trading cards, for instance, is so extreme, the amount of hours I have to do, that I really don't have time to play. And because of that, because of running TwinGalaxies in the past, and because of doing the trading cards, it takes so many hours that I haven't played in years hardly. Now, I'll be going to about 4 events over the next 2 or 3 months, and at those events, I'll probably play a little bit. Maybe I'll play 8 hours of playing or something, and that'll be all the playing I'll do almost for the whole year. When I go to events, I'll get a little bit of time to play Centipede or make tracks or Pac-Man or Miss Pac-Man. But other than that, I don't have any time to play anymore because it just takes too many hours to play, too much time, too much energy, and too much focus. So therefore, I'm not much of a player anymore. And so during the time that they're making these movies, I already had slipped into the mode of operation of being a non-player and just being the spokesperson. So I was more of a spokesperson moderator, as you pointed out.
I see. So you said you started out as selling newspapers, and you had that idea of building up TwinGalaxies. But actually, how did you promote it? I mean, how did it become big? Because that was before internet.
It was all divine luck. It was all luck and good fortune. And they have an expression, they call it life support. In other words, you know how in sports, do you follow soccer?
A bit, not seriously.
Well, you understand. Here's an analogy that I know you'll understand. In baseball, in American baseball, you've seen an American baseball game, so you know what it looks like, right?
Sure, yes.
You know what it looks like. Even if you don't know all the details of the rules, you know what it looks like, okay? So when the batter hits the ball and it goes bouncing across the ground, if it hits a pebble or if it hits some unusual like pile of dirt on the ground, it'll bounce up and the player will miss it. You have to have the ball work in your favor so you can get it and not do anything that's an obstruction. It just happened that when I started TwinGalaxies, every single thing bounced in my favor. No obstacles or enemies or pitfalls surfaced at any time at the beginning, so that it was absolutely easy. I announced, oh, we're the scorekeepers for the world. And everybody says, yes, that's great. Thank you. How can we help you? And it went on like that for the first couple of years, that everybody lined up saying, how can we help you? Thank you for doing this. So it's really, you know, the word karma.
Yes,
it was just
sure.
destiny. It was just destiny to make it happen. And there were no obstacles for the first couple of years. Everything worked perfectly, and every single initiative, every single project we took on worked out perfectly with no problems. Later on, it became harder and harder to do because it became bigger with more problems and more people who had psychological disorders who loved video games. So It was fun. It was a lot of fun for the first couple of years. Then after that, it became a lot of work because then we had to deal with the stress, the psychological stress of many of the gamers, which you see on the internet all the time because there's so many people doing fights and warfare on the internet.
Actually, back in the days, it was like a geek thing, and so wasn't it hard for you to get the acceptance of the public? Because back in the 80s, it was like a player was a geek, and it was like, oh, he's from another planet, something like that.
Well, as far as the media was concerned, that was part of the unique appeal of being Twin Galaxies and being the scorekeeper and being we were the kings of the whole video game world, Twin Galaxies. We were the center where people would come to our arcade in Ottumwa, Iowa, from all sorts of other countries. We were the crossroads. We were literally the crossroads of the video game age back in the early 80s. And the media was intrigued by that because they thought it was such a fascinating niche. You know the word niche, of course. A fascinating little groove that we had placed ourselves in that was getting such worldwide acclaim. So yes, they did think that it was all geeky and fun and strange, but it was so unique that this small town, Ottumwa, Iowa, was becoming the center for all the gamers in the world. We weren't we weren't San Jose, Silicon Valley. We weren't New York City or Los Angeles. We were a little town in Iowa surrounded by cornfields, but we were the place that the video gamers would go to from other countries, from all parts. People would show up there just so that they'd be able to write in their diary, in their memoirs, that, oh, I once went to the video game capital of the world, Ottumwa, Iowa, where Twin Galaxies was. So it was geeky and it was strange. And one of the reasons we got picked up so fast was because the manufacturers believed in us so much that when important things would come up, they would say, oh, send them to Twin Galaxies. Walter Day will have the answer. That's why Life magazine came to Twin Galaxies and did that famous, the famous photograph.
Yes, that's also part of the movie.
Oh, yeah, in front there, yeah. That was in Chasing Ghosts. You saw Chasing Ghosts?
Yes, that too.
Yep. So the famous photograph was because the industry sent Life magazine to us to help them with their photograph. And they decided to come. I talked them into coming to Ottumwa and do the photograph there. And also, That's Incredible, the famous TV show that did that first big championship, that was also sent to us by the manufacturers. And so we became the crossroads that they trusted and relied upon to represent the voice of the gamers everywhere. See, they were concerned about making the games and selling the games, that industrial side of things. We were in charge of the spirit of being a gamer for the whole world of gaming. And so they would trust us with that responsibility and send important contacts like Life magazine and That's Incredible to us because we would represent the spiritual voice of the gamers of the world.
So the next question is actually, I guess, I'm sure you know about the video game crash that was in America in 1983. And actually, I did an interview with David Crane, the co-founder of Activision. The first.
He's on one of the trading cards. David Crane is on one of our trading cards.
Ah, yes, great. So actually, he said he's responsible for the video game crash because when he released games and they sold so well, he made it look like it was so easy to make millions of monies that so many companies started making crap games. So my question is, did this affect you? Did this affect Twin Galaxies? What did you experience of this crash of the game industry?
Lots and lots of companies joined the video game industry because success stories like David Crane painted a certain picture that was very appealing. So many companies started up, invested their money, built up big leverage. They leveraged a lot of debt. And then they discovered that they couldn't cover that debt load. And also many of them had investors, and investors would make decisions in terms of their bottom line, like the investors or corporate boards of owners would make decisions based on them getting their money back. So a lot of companies, they shut down and claimed the losses, or made decisions that weren't completely viable for the company to survive through. And as they're making more and more home games, of course, more and more kids were buying the home game systems and playing more and more games in their houses. Their parents were giving them less and less money to go spend in the arcade. So the number of quarters that were being spent in Ottumwa, where we were, and also across the nation, the number of quarters was becoming less and less and less and less. However, businessmen like doctors and lawyers and dentists were still opening up arcades thinking they were going to make a fortune. And they were getting all the games because the game distributors and the game manufacturers were extending them a lot of credit. And a game back in 1981, 82, 83 would cost almost the same as a brand new automobile. So, or maybe a down payment on a house. Okay? So suddenly, an arcade owner would have a big arcade with 35 games in there that he got on credit, and each one of them is the equivalent to a mortgage on a car or a house. And as the kids began to not come to the arcade because they had home games and also they just got bored with the arcades, the number of quarters became less and less and less and less and less, until suddenly all these arcades got foreclosed on, and the manufacturers or the distributors took back hundreds of thousands of games that couldn't be paid for because the arcades were going out of business because they weren't making enough income to even just cover their overhead, no less pay the mortgages. So therefore, everybody, that's exactly what happened to me. TwinGalaxies closed. See, we didn't own our own games. We were leasing them from an operator. An operator would have a route, a vending route, and he would have his games. He would have his video games, his pinball machines, his pool tables, his candy machines, his coffee machines, his Coca-Cola machines, and his pinball and his jukeboxes. He would have hundreds or thousands of these spread across hundreds or thousands of locations. Okay? And I had a route operator putting the games in TwinGalaxies. One day, a big truck pulled up and confiscated all the games in our arcade because the route operator got foreclosed upon by the distributor. So one moment we were open, next moment we were an empty room. And because this was happening to everybody across the nation, we couldn't get anybody new to bring games back into our place. So from that moment on, March 6, 1984, the TwinGalaxies arcade was closed. But we were still the scoreboard. So we went on the road with a scoreboard and continued to be the scorekeepers, but we didn't have an arcade anymore.
I see.
That was a big explanation. Did it make sense?
Sure.
Okay.
Did you actually reopen it?
Well, later on, the famous video game player Billy Mitchell went back and opened the arcade location, and he owned the arcade. He still had the TwinGalaxies sign up above it, and he opened it and ran it for 5 whole years. But he ran it as an arcade without the scoreboard.
I see. So, actually, history also says that it was Nintendo with his NES video game console, that actually got the industry out of the misery. Is that also according to you?
Well, now that's the NES, because I did most of my scorekeeping at that time on the arcade games. And I temporarily retired from doing video games, and the scoreboard went on vacation for some years. And during that time, the NES opened up. So I'm not an expert on commenting on the NES, but I do believe that it was the NES that made people start playing video games again in greater numbers. See, I think you're right.
Well, I'm just quoting history, what I heard. So you said Billy Mitchell, who actually holds also the world record on Donkey Kong, if I'm not mistaken.
Not
Um,
not for a long time. There's about there's about 10 people who have higher scores than he does. See, here's how it works on Donkey Kong. Donkey Kong is the classic example of a legendary high score based video game that has a big following of people who want to be the champion. They're all out to try and make the world record on Donkey Kong. And so as they practice more and more and more and more, they push the score higher and higher and higher. In fact, 2 weeks ago, the world record on Donkey Kong was broken again, and someone has made the score even higher. When the score reaches this high stratospheric level, it becomes harder for it to get broken again, because the amount of games that you as a Donkey Kong player have to play in order to move that score up even 100 points more could be hundreds of games. It could be 1,000 hours of playing. And as these people get better and better, but also as they get older and older, and as more time goes on, the score gets higher, and most of these people now are in their 30s and in their 40s and almost 50 years old, and they have children, they have careers, they have companies, they have houses, and the commitment of time and energy and focus to do the game and get the score higher is becoming more and more formidable, meaning becoming an obstacle. So that there's going to come a time soon when the world record on Donkey Kong, as a classic example, this applies to other games too, but Donkey Kong's the most famous. As the world record gets higher, eventually the world record's going to stall. You know the word stall? In
yes,
other
sure.
words, it's not going to be able to move any further for a long time. And it may stall for a decade, it may stall for a whole generation, or it might stall for even longer, because the number of times to play and the number of hours needed to spend on playing Donkey Kong in order to break that world record even a little bit higher is so extreme that most people can't afford that commitment and that expenditure of time and energy spent on Donkey Kong when they have wives and children and houses and jobs. So I believe that there's going to come a day, some day from now, some year from now, maybe 150 years from now, when suddenly on the news they're going to announce that somebody named John Smith, or any name, John Smith, has broken the 100-year-old Donkey Kong world record after playing Donkey Kong 5 times a day for his entire life, and finally broke it after playing for 40 or 50 years. Because it's going to be that big of a deal to even push the score 1 point further. And then someday there'll come a day when it won't ever go higher, and it will stall forever. And that'll be the end of Donkey Kong. It'll be like 1,250,000 points. And for a person to break it, they'd have to be like a mental athlete and do nothing but that for the rest of their life before they finally get that one special game to break the record. So this is probably a bigger answer than you needed.
Well, I mean, you also have to take into account one problem is that the hardware won't survive so long. So actually, a lot of gamers nowadays rely on emulation.
Well, that's true. That's true. And in fact, at this point in time, because the emulation renders the game slightly different, just slightly though, at least that's my understanding, uh, we separate their scores. The score on the score on emulation is actually higher than the score on the arcade. But the top Donkey Kong scores, the top Donkey Kong players explain it this way. They say that it's more comfortable to play on emulation than actually being on the arcade in front of the arcade game with the joystick. So they think that that is the deciding factor in the feeling for playing Donkey Kong that allows it to be an easier, more comfortable experience. I don't play either of them right now, so therefore I'll just have to accept their explanation because they're the experts who have the highest scores, so maybe that's what it is. But yes, there's going to come a time. See, an old video game an old video game is like a human being. It has an old liver, it has an old kidneys, it has old gallbladder, and those things begin to fade and die out. So eventually, these old games, they're not going to function anymore. But there is a trend of swapping out the components for brand new modern components while still having the original ROMs be played. At some point in time, and because it's still the same ROM chips or something, or fresh ROM chips with the ROM code loaded in, I guess technically it isn't emulated ROM code. So at some point they're going to have to make a value call and decide when is something emulated and when is it not emulated. You know what I mean?
Yes,
So,
so you mean it's shifting.
yeah, there's that future. And I believe that eventually it's all going to go emulation. And at some time in the future, emulation will be so standardized and so perfect and clean that it'll be fine. It'll be fine with me. Because what'll happen, it'll still be the same spiritual essence of the game that the original arcade edition was offering. It's just that they're not held back by the dying technology, the
Yeah,
dying hard.
yeah. So actually, well, you said your TwinGalaxies is or well was or still is international, but in the movies, the well Chasing Ghosts and the King of Kong is usually well it more looked like an American thing for some reason. Most of those people they showed in the arcades or they interviewed were Americans actually.
Yeah, well, here's how that works. Here's how that works. As the scorekeeper, we would get online submissions, like for INP files from AIM, from about 90 different countries or 100 different countries. When we get submissions on DVDs or videotapes, those would come from 30 or 40 or 50 different countries. But when people actually show up to be in front of the cameras, it's not that easy for just someone from Italy or someone from Australia or from Austria or from Germany to make it to the United States to be part of the filming. So even though we were scorekeepers for them, verifying their scores from all these different countries, for them to actually come in person and be in front of the cameras for the documentaries is a whole different situation because that's a lot of expense. And a lot of these people who are very devoted to games, especially those games, a lot of them, it was not that easy for them to just jump. A lot of them were college students. And a big trip to America, as fun as it would be, and as entertaining as it would be, that's a whole lot of money.
Mm,
That's
okay.
why that's why it mostly would be Americans or Canadians who would show up at the events. However, at the famous Fun Spot event, people regularly would come from England or Australia or Canada. And at events here in Fairfield, Iowa, where I'm based, we had people come from Mexico and all over Canada. And so people would come. It's just that it wouldn't be a lot of people because it's so expensive. Traveling is expensive.
So actually you did that documentation and you said it was more international than it actually appeared. So what was the most exciting moment you had at your work at TwinGalaxies apart from Donkey Kong? Because Donkey Kong is that big thing of the documentation, but what was your personal favorite or your personal well most amazing or most remindable experience?
Well, back in the old days, when it was all new and all fresh, when it was all brand new and fresh, a new experience, there were three main big things that happened. Actually, four main big things that happened. And the first one, of course, was the Life magazine event that was documented quite adequately by the Chasing Ghosts movie. And of course, if your viewers haven't seen Chasing Ghosts, you might want to tell them how they can go see Chasing Ghosts. They should go see the original one, not the one that was processed for HBO, because the original one has the original soundtrack, which is more fun. And then the second big thing, and the reason that was a big deal is because that brought together for the first time the top champions of the video game age. They were the first hardcore gamers, and they traveled from all over North America to be there in front of the photographer's lens for Life magazine. And then just 2 months later, we had That's Incredible, the famous TV show that was made by ABC Television, and they came and did an important video game championship. And once again, it was the first time that video game players were brought from all over, like North America, to play on 5 different games to prove who was the best all-round player. And then right after that, because Ottumwa was proclaimed the video game capital of the world by the mayor of Ottumwa, Atari came from California, and the Amusement Game Manufacturers Association came from Washington, D.C., and the governor of Iowa, his name was Terry Branstad, came down, and they all converged on Ottumwa, and they got in there on a big ceremony, and they proclaimed Ottumwa the video game capital of the world because they considered it the birthplace of organized video game play. So those were very exciting. And then right after that, we had the Electronic Circus, which was a big experience, which maybe you've heard about, the Electronic Circus. And then right after that, we launched the U.S. National Video Game Team, which possibly could have been history's first pro video game team. We went on the road in a big bus and went around the nation and faced against all comers. And my players would always beat everyone. My players were always better than everybody else we met in the arcades. So those 5 things were monumental. They were very, very important and very, very historic and a lot of fun. So those are my favorites.
So actually, if I understand you correctly, you even pioneered in the professional e-gaming field, kind of?
Maybe. We started the U.S. National Video Game Team on July 25th, 1983. And we went on the road as the team. We played people all over the place. And we got sponsored and paid by the different arcades that we visited. So essentially, we were getting paid. So I guess we were a professional organized team. So if that makes us the birthplace of esports, then that's it. But if it doesn't, because someone else did it before us, then more power to them too.
So actually you say you did this all for fun, but you also need to afford a living and you need to get the company running. So was it all on donations?
For a long time, the arcade supported the scoreboard. Then the arcade closed down. So then I supported the scoreboard while being a landlord. And then when we did contests, we'd sometimes get support from manufacturers like Sega or Midway or Atari, Nintendo. So that would happen different times over the years. But a lot of the years it was a labor of love because I enjoyed doing it. It was just a fun experience.
So it
became all a part of community. Because what I learned from it is the most important thing about the whole experience was not about the games, but was about the people and the friendships and sharing the experience. So it's all about learning about friends and being friends and uplifting people. Because it's very important to note that when you uplift someone else, you uplift yourself. When you uplift someone else, you uplift yourself too. So it's all about learning how to be a better person through the social interaction that video games became just the facilitator, became the device, the thing that we had in common that we shared.
So, seeing it that back in the 80s, 70s, you were like a geek, a single person alone without friends playing video games, and nowadays it's like social interaction. You play online and so on. You play against each other, and you have to see that the average gamer is like 10 years, 20 years older than back in the days. Would you say that you helped changing the image of a gamer or a computer nerd to the positive?
You mean if I personally caused it?
Yes.
Oh, I don't make any claims like that. Some people will say, "Oh, Walter, you did this, you did that," but I don't have necessarily any opinion that that's true. See, the whole thing has been smooth and innocent and just fun. And if other people want to go and analyze it, that TwinGalaxies caused this or TwinGalaxies inspired that, it's all over my head. I've just been here to have fun, and I don't have any special presumption that TwinGalaxies made the culture what it is today. It's just been a fun experience, and that's enough for me.
Okay, so you don't think of yourself as a pioneer, actually?
Well, no, pioneering is a special word. No, we definitely were pioneers because me and my group of players, we were the first to actually organize the scoreboard, organize organize video game playing, have a team, have the first big championship, which brought lots of people around who played on all these different games. The Life magazine, which gave a social structure to the new world of being a gamer. So a lot of that stuff is pioneering. So admittedly, I and TwinGalaxies and all the players who surrounded TwinGalaxies at that time, all of us together were the pioneers as a group. So I definitely will agree with that.
So, did you actually meet a lot of pioneers? I mean, like David Crane or other people who pioneered in the video game industry field? I guess you must have met a lot of people.
Oh yeah, I've met a lot of people. But back in those days, I would only meet people who were in the arcade world. People whose names you wouldn't know. People who were part of designing the arcade games. Like the person who designed Berserk, or Crystal Castles, or Centipede, or the person who designed uh, lots of iRobot, lots of different games. We would have run into those people a lot because we would meet them at the trade shows. There was a big trade show called the AMOA, another one called the AOE, another one called the ASI, then the AAMA, ACME, all these big trade shows where we go there and we would demonstrate the games to the public for the manufacturers. So we did that numerous times.
Okay. Um, let's talk a bit about how this all changed. I mean, when did you actually see it decreasing? I mean, if you look at it nowadays, for example, there are no more real arcades in Germany, just two clubs that repair and well, restore old machines and open once a month or something. But they are not really commercial driven arcades anymore so much. At least I know about maybe two or three. And even I saw in the USA, the arcades that I saw, I don't know, in the New Jersey, for example, when I was in the USA 5 years ago, most of them are with damaged machines. They are not really maintained anymore. They are broken. So, how was that development for you? When did you see it? When did you see it going down the well, going down the mountain in a way?
Well, in the 1983, 1984, 1985 era, you know, tens of thousands of arcades closed. Maybe 50,000 arcades closed in North America alone, maybe more. And since then, it was very rare to see arcades open up. Video games, video games from that moment onward, when the golden age of the arcades ended, like at the beginning of '85, uh, from that point onward, it seems that video game arcades would only work to some degree if they were part of a bigger facility, a bigger location. And that's when they started creating what are called family entertainment centers or location-based entertainment. They called them LBEs or FECs. So that when you went to a place that had video games, you'd find out that it's making more money off of its miniature golf, off of its go-karts. And in America, it would be baseball batting cages where they swing the bat the ball. So batting cages, roller skating rinks, bowling. So a family entertainment center would have bowling, miniature golf, roller skating, batting cages, video game and pinball, and eating places. And so that's what become a family entertainment center. And there would be an arcade in there. But the only reason the arcade is surviving is because it's being supported by all these other activities. So the type of business that we call the traditional neighborhood arcade, which existed solely on video game and pinball, those became non-existent, so that only a handful were surviving. And now there's only, I think, about two or three in the United States that are still around since the 1980s. that are a genuine, authentic, old-fashioned, traditional neighborhood arcades. One of them is called Star Worlds, and it's in DeKalb, Illinois. And that man will be available to be interviewed if you'd like to talk. So Star Worlds in DeKalb, Illinois. There was another one in Santa Clara, California, or Santa Rosa, California, but it recently closed 1 year ago. So video games would not survive as just a neighborhood arcade. They have to be part of a bigger business with all sorts of developed business plan. Okay? And that's the way it had been for the last 20-some years, it seems. Okay? Recently, there's a new phenomenon going on where two kinds of things are popping up. Either a retro arcade or a barcade. The barcade is actually a bar where the people go and have nightclub activities like drinking and dancing and karaoke, but they also have a whole bunch of old video games. And they try and make it a retro arcade inside the barcade so that it's classic games inside the barcade. And that's a very popular thing. It seems that most big cities in America are trying to open up. Somebody's trying to open up a barcade. Now, close on its heels is the retro arcade, which tries to be old-fashioned from the same as years ago. And they have pinball, video games, and maybe pool and a jukebox. They don't have bowling, they don't have roller skating, they don't have go-karts, they don't have batting cages, they don't have miniature golf, but they'll have the old-fashioned neighborhood arcade, and it's full of all the old games. And it seems like most big cities right now in America are in the process of opening up a retro arcade, which is just bringing back to life the spirit of the arcade of the early 1980s. So that might work, and in many cases, it's actually working, and they're able to make money and support themselves. So that's the phenomena that I see in America going on right now, the barcade and the retro arcade.
I see. Did you actually look at other countries, how it is, for example, in Latin America, like Peru or Brazil? Because I saw the difference between America or Peru and Brazil is, for example, in Peru and Lima, in the capital city, I saw a lot of modern arcade machines, like, like more like, I don't know, like a punching machine, like those you would see maybe in Japan, but not so much classic gaming like Donkey Kong or something. While in Brazil, most of the arcades that I saw, for example, in Sao Paulo, were like MAME PCs in an arcade cabinet with classic gaming like Donkey Kong, Street Fighter, and so on. So did you have a look at how it developed in other countries, like, for example, Japan, where it's still a big deal?
Well, that's a really good question. I personally have not done any research on any foreign countries, but I have a general assumption of what's going on in other countries based on the kind of messages that I get on Facebook. and I've learned that many other countries, they all have some sort of retro gaming convention. They have like a retro gaming expo. I think I've been contacted by the people who are doing a retro gaming expo in Argentina, one in Brazil, France, the Netherlands, lots of them, at least 3 or 4 of them in Great Britain, because retro gaming is popular, okay, for the arcade cabinets and also for the home consoles. Now, what actually happens in a modern arcade is if you go to a modern arcade, and when I say modern arcade, I don't mean a neighborhood arcade because there aren't any of those. But if you go someplace like in Disneyland or someplace, you'll find that most of their games are the brand new modern ones, the punching, the kicking, or the driving, or the shooting, okay? Flying, driving, shooting, punching, all that modern stuff. And they rarely have a classic game. If you go to an airport in America, and that's a good example, by the way, an airport will have an arcade, and you'll see most of the games modern, with 1 game or 2 games being a classic game, but almost all of it's modern. So the profile that you're describing for some of these other countries does seem to hold true to many, many different countries because it's the modern games that will make more money than the old games. Because the old games in a public setting might make $2 a week, but Big Buck Hunter or some brand new game by Namco or Konami or Raw Thrills will make a lot more money. So it's the modern games in the modern settings that will make more money, and they hardly ever have the classic games. So I agree with what you've seen as being true. In Japan, that's very unusual though, because they still have a huge, huge public support and public appreciation of the corner arcade. That's why there's still thousands of arcades in Japan on many corners in all the big cities there. So it's an interesting phenomenon because they still consider it an important family activity for a whole family to go to the arcade and play the games there and spend a lot of money there. Whereas it's something today in America that might happen a little bit in a retro arcade, the whole family will go, only because the parents want the children to have the experience of the arcade because they loved it themselves so much when they were kids. This makes sense to you?
Yes, sure, definitely. So you see the future of those arcades more in emulation, because you mentioned earlier in the interview that actually nowadays it's not good enough for you yet, but you think that in a few years the emulation might be as good as the original hardware.
Well, the emulation probably is pretty close right now. In fact, I think some people would stand up and argue with me and say, Walter, it's perfect. I think it's different from game to game to game. I think in the case of Donkey Kong, it slightly has a different characteristic. There are some ways that it will behave slightly different. That's my opinion. But of course, the experts might say, Walter, you're behind the time. It's already been made perfect, so forget about it. Okay? But but I believe that it will have to eventually be emulation. And the reason for that is because the technology is aging. The
Well,
technology also suppose you put on a world like when they do the Donkey Kong World Championship, which is going to be in New Jersey in the March. So you should think of coming to that. In New Jersey in March, the Donkey Kong World Championship, they're actually going to have 20 old original Donkey Kongs in a row. And it takes them all year to find them one at a time and then completely refurbish them, completely fix them up so they're completely working properly and they're clean and they're beautiful again.
wow. And that's happening in New Jersey in next March.
At, at the Richie Knuckles Arcade.
Okay. You should definitely send me a link to that thing, so I
Yeah,
will have a look.
so you should come to that.
I will see. I didn't make any plans so far, but I have been invited to Japan. I might be doing that too.
Well, that sounds wonderful. That'll be a lot of fun.
Definitely. Well, as you see behind me, I'm more a fan of the original hardware. So I have my own arcade in my living room. And people ask me, "Does it still work? Does it still run?" And I say, "Yes, of course."
Awesome.
So definitely, yeah. Yeah, well, as you had so much fun with it, I wonder why did you decide to stop it in 2010?
What did I stop in 2010? Stop being the scorekeeper and well, well, here's the main reason. Well, right now I'm doing the trading cards and getting that off the ground, and that's a lot of fun. But in 2 months, 3 months, I'm going to be spending a lot of time working on music because that's one of my heart's desires. Because I'm now 65 years old, and if I don't do it now, it'll never happen. So if I want to complete this desire and actually have the experience of writing and performing music, I have to do it now. So,
Well, I mean, if you look at that, um, if you look at that, the most people I interview for my magazine are like in their 70s or 80s or even 90s, and they are still active. Like Ralph Baer with almost 93, he's still inventing electronic toys, and he's still making teaching lessons. So if you look at that, people who pioneer something and technical things, they never stop. So you could do it also in 20 years if you look at it like that.
Well, I'm going to do it now and get it out of the way.
So do you actually consider returning to do more video game stuff?
Well, I'm having so much fun with the trading cards that I don't need to. Because other people are running TwinGalaxies now, and they're very happy with it, and they're doing a tremendous job.
So what's a trading thing card actually about?
Well, have you ever, how like a sports figure will be on a little card, a little card, and people collect them? They have
Sure.
a sports card. Well, that's what I'm doing now with video games. That's what I'm doing with video game stars and video game history. I'm putting them on trading cards so people collect them, and also it studies the history. So it's like being a historian, like being a teacher.
Although that's why you are called historian Wikipedia. That's because partly of the trading cards.
Well, no, but probably more because of the newspapers.
So tell me, how would a typical day at Twin Galaxies look like? I mean, when you still ran it, when you still did the scores keeping, because in the movies, it looked like one guy had like a pile of 60 VHS cassettes going through the whole day.
Well, there were some people who were more involved in doing more work, but there were about 40 referees who were all receiving tapes and videos and DVDs from all over the world and verifying the scores. And when they were verified, then they'd be put in the database.
So you had like 40 people surrounded by you, surrounding you to help you actually.
Yeah, because they were all volunteers too. And the reason they were volunteers, spending lots and lots of hours, was because they loved what they were doing and they wanted to support the growth of the hobby.
That's interesting. So I asked you earlier what was your best experience. What was your worst experience, if I may ask?
Oh, I don't know. Uh, I felt sad when I saw the people fighting so much. Controversy about scores and controversy about who got the world record on this and that. So that was kind of hard because I wanted everybody to be happy and like each other and treat each other properly. So, you know how people flame each other on the internet nowadays? There's been too much of that in the video game world. But that's all. But mainly it's been a very, very positive experience.
So, okay, thank you. So, if you look at video games nowadays, do you think that video games are too realistic or are not fun anymore?
Well, I guess fun is different from one person to the next. And that's why people have taste. Some people like Robotron because it's fun, but other people hate Robotron. Some people like Legend of Zelda because it's fun. Other people might be bored, so therefore it's not fun. I guess it's just taste. So what is fun for one person is not fun for another. Uh, they are getting more and more realistic. In fact, I think most likely we're going to enter a science fiction future where the games become so interactive and so all encompassing. What's the expression they use for that? When it becomes it's going to become cyberspace is going to become all so pervasive that it'll be a very, very unique, dynamic experience that they're beginning to portray more and more in Hollywood films. So I think the future of video games is going to be very dramatic and it's going to be more physical. Right now, a lot of video games is just you moving your fingers and your hands. But I think in the future, it's going to be more developed, like the dance kind of games. You're dancing and actually moving the body as part of the actual activity of playing the game. And I think more and more in the future, that your dynamic involvement on a physical level with the game will be important, will become an important part of that game.
Well, that's actually how the Nintendo Wii got famous because of the motion controller.
Yes, exactly.
But don't you think if games are more realistic, like virtual reality or something, that it's kind of dangerous, though that players might get lost in the game?
Well, I don't know about that part. I mean, they may. I think that what you put it, I believe that what you put your attention on grows in your life. The level of malevolent violence and anger in a lot of the games, I'm sure is going to affect someone. There's some people, there's probably a significant percentage of young people or even old people who are very susceptible to being influenced by the quality of the game. And the level of negativity and violence in the game inevitably is going to have an effect on different people. And so I think that that is a danger and that's a problem. And I'm not sure what's going to be able to be done about it because it seems that society is dead set on playing the games. But essentially, the games do influence people. They do have an effect. They do affect the personality, I believe, and the attitude. So it could become a very concerning factor.
Well, speaking about that, actually I read there's even a Tetris disease. When you play too much Tetris, for some people, they are starting to put things like in your trunk, in your car, like a Tetris game, actually.
Yeah, what you put your attention on grows in your life. And so a lot of these games are very heavy in their negative themes and in their violent themes. And so that simply can't be good for the psychology, especially of very young, impressionable children.
But then there is this discussion since years, since 30, 40 years, since video games started, that actually the, I don't know, murders in Norway or USA for at schools started out because the children, the pupils, played too much violent video games. What's your take on that?
Well, um, I think that the children who did violent acts already had the tendency for violence in them. And it didn't help that the influence of the violent video game got added on top of that. So I believe that the violent video games don't make a person a murderer. However, they can add negativity to someone who already is negative, who already has a problem inside, and that the violent video games just kind of like cause some sort of encouragement on the surface or some sort of further influencing that affects them in the inner place where they're already weak and violent and angry and have psychological problems. So violent video games do have, in my opinion, an effect. But there's tons and tons of people who come in with a smiling face, play the violent video games, and they still go out and remain well-adjusted people. But I believe that the violent video games do exert some influence on them. And here's an analogy. If you're driving your car and the car's not balanced, I think there's an adjustment with the wheels that if you take your hands off the wheels, if you take your hands off the steering wheel, the car might go to the right or might go to the left if you don't hold onto the wheel. And that's because the car is out of alignment. And when the car is out of alignment, it makes the tires wear in a special way so that a car expert could come up and see that one of your tires has a huge amount of wear on the right side. Let's say your right front tire has a huge amount of wear, way more than the left. The reason the tires are getting worn in that way is because of the undue pressure or influence that's coming from the deep infrastructure of the car that's having its influence be put on the tires. Now, this analogy, let's use it this way. There are certain inner things about a person's psychology that will cause an influence in how they behave. Okay? And when the video game influence is added upon that, it causes that influence deep within inside them to become even more exaggerated and will begin to affect how they think and how they act and how they begin to portray themselves as a human being with whatever personality they have. In the same way, that misalignment that's inside the car will wear out the tire. In the same way, some sort of inner misalignment that's inside their psyche, inside their nervous system, is going to cause an effect on their nervous system, an effect on their personality, and then an effect on their behavior. And when you add the video games on top of that to those kind of people, it's easy for someone to go and say, here is the cause and effect. Video games influence this person to be this way. But they were already bringing to the table some misalignment that they already had that was already causing them to have a certain personality profile that was very, very vulnerable to be influenced by the negativity of the video games. So in a sense, the video games do connect to it all. However, that's not the story. The story is that they brought to the table, they were already having some misalignment inside that needed to be taken care of, but wasn't being taken care of. So the people will go and blame it on video games. Video games do cause negativity, no question about it. But it depends on the individual person and how well adjusted and how well aligned they are inside, how they will go and use the experience of playing video games. So does that make sense to you?
Yes. So we could say maybe it was a video game, but for the other guys, it might also be a movie, a horror movie that causes the extreme.
That's a good example. Some people will be influenced by the terrible negativities in a horror movie or a serial killer movie or something like that. It's just, there's so many ways that people are getting influenced from the outside. And then there's a whole group of people who now are beginning to say the genetically modified foodstuffs, you know, the GMOs, the modified genetic foodstuff, is having an effect on people's nervous system too, and will show itself in human behavior as the years roll on. And also cell phone use, people getting affected by cell phones, causing different changes in the brain hemisphere, the hemispherical coordination of the brain, whatever. Lots and lots of activity that goes on in the brain that would express itself in personality traits is clearly being affected or being influenced by the microwaves coming from cell phone towers maybe, or from cell phones. So we are being influenced by a lot of things, including video games. So they're not wrong when they say that video games could have played a role. However, it's a bigger picture than that because the people already had some sort of imbalance going on inside that had to be dealt with on a deeper level.
I see. That's very interesting. Yeah. Well, so you really made some thought about that and thought about what could influence people or not. I guess it's also based on your own experience. So did you even, did you ever meet any violent people in your career?
I met a lot of angry people, but usually they would not become violent. That was very, in fact, I'm trying to think of an instance when somebody got violent. And I don't think I can think of hardly any instances. They got angry at each other, but they weren't truly violent.
Mm.
Now, there could be some, but they just weren't part of my personal experience.
That's very good then. So let's go back a bit to TwinGalaxies history. What wasn't clear to me actually is you gave it to somebody else in 2010, but then I experienced like last year that suddenly the website was down. And since I think June this year or something, it's Chase Hall who announced that he took over the TwinGalaxies. And actually he was the guy who told me how to get in touch with you. So what did happen in between? Why was TwinGalaxies down?
Well, TwinGalaxies, because I retired and turned it over to some other people some years ago, it went through about 4 sets of owners before it reached Jace Hall. Maybe Jace Hall's the 4th set. So it had a lot of technical difficulties with the website. And there was a point when Jace Hall took over, but he didn't want to but he didn't want to turn on his new website until he felt that it lived up to his expectations because he wanted it to be the best possible website. And the owner right before him was moving away from being in TwinGalaxies. And so I'm trying to remember the exact reason why, but the website got turned off because I guess part of it was because there was no one part of the staff anymore who was able to run it properly, but I may be wrong. I may be wrong. Some earlier owners were arguing over how to do it properly, and I don't know if that was the most instrumental thing. Actually, I'm trying to remember exactly why it was turned off. But I know why it stayed off for a while, because when Jace turned it on, he wanted to make sure that it was the best possible website that he could start the new regime under. So he had it remain turned off for a while.
So let's talk about how TwinGalaxies changed. I mean, if you look at it, you stopped at it 2010, and that was already the time where there was Facebook. For example, I caught you on Facebook actually, and there was Twitter and YouTube and so on. So how did TwinGalaxies catch up with the new technologies or the internet, for example? Back in the 80s, there was no internet. So how did you develop TwinGalaxies to catch up with the recent developments?
Well, on March 7th, 1997, TwinGalaxies website went live, March 7th, 1997. And slowly but surely, we've had I think about 7 or 8 or 9 different websites, different incarnations of the website. Slowly getting better, slowly getting better. And we've never really had a lot of money, so therefore we couldn't make any tremendous leap forward in technology. And each time there'd be different groups of people working on it. They would bring different levels of expertise with them. So sometimes the website would get better, sometimes it would be not as good. But it always moved forward, and people continued to believe in it and support it. And then recently, when it was turned off, Jace came equipped to do the best job yet, because Jace Hall has the most connections to the to technology and to also Hollywood. And Hollywood, movies, technology, he has the most connections. So it appears that the version he's going to do of TwinGalaxies will be the best. So it's been sort of like an upward spiral, slowly getting better and slowly getting better. But I personally have never been a technology guy, so therefore my job was not. I mean, I never was that good at it, but right now Jace Hall is doing a very good job, and we're expecting it to become absolutely wonderful, and TwinGalaxies will become the center of the gaming universe once again.
Well, you say you're not the technology guy, but in a way you are too, because you have Facebook. We are using Skype now to do this interview, so you are up to par with the development in a way. Anyway.
Well, in a little bit, but I'm not really a technologist who understands anything or can do anything. I can just push a button, turn on the microphone.
So you know how it works, and you are happy with that.
Yes.
So are you still in touch with the community despite you left?
Absolutely, because the video game trading card set that I've been working on has a big following, and the community is very, very involved.
So actually, I saw on Facebook that you even received a Lifetime Achievement Award.
Yeah, that was given to me in Ottumwa by the International Video Game Hall of Fame back in August of 2010.
Tell me a bit more about that. How did that happen? How it felt for you?
Well, for me, it was wonderful. It was really surprising because I didn't expect it. But they gave me the Lifetime Achievement Award. It was very, very nice, very, very humbling too, because there's so many people who deserve an award like that. And doing TwinGalaxies was fun, but I don't necessarily think it's the biggest thing anybody's ever done. It's just a nice, fun thing to do. And for them to give me a Lifetime Achievement Award was very kind, and actually named the award after me too. Was very kind, and probably too generous, probably too kind. But I was very flattered and honored, and it's great. I can only thank them.
Well, actually, you're not the only one who received his in 2010. Even David Crane got his Lifetime Achievement Award in 2010. So
Oh yeah,
you
that's
are
good.
part of the club and history books now.
Yeah.
Um, Speaking about history books, tell me a bit about how it was it to work with the Guinness Book of Records, because I think it must be pretty hard because they have so high requirements.
Well, starting in 1983, they trusted my work. So we had a relationship with them from 83, 84, 85, 86, where they would publish everything that we verified essentially. So they would trust us to go out and run a contest to come up with a genuine verified world records on 200 different arcade games. And then because the mood changes, uh, after 86, they stopped running the scores because the interest of the public changes, and they wanted to use those 3 or 4 pages that they were giving our high scores. They wanted to use those pages for some other subject matter.
Mm,
So after 4 straight years, they stopped running the scores, and then they didn't run the scores again for 22 or 21 years. They didn't run video game scores again. And then at that time, they reconnected me, or I contacted them. I can't remember. And and I did a bunch of contests, and I actually wrote the actual text for a whole bunch of them, and they came out with like 4 pages. I think it was in the 2006, 2007 Guinness Book of World Records, and I said to them, "Boy, this is really looking good here. In fact, if I were to supply you with all my data, would you like to do with me an official video game gamers edition of the Guinness Book of World Records?" And they said, "Yes, we would." And so, and they said to me, "How should we do it?" So I sent them all sorts of ideas, all sorts of tables and ideas and concepts, and feature boxes, explaining we do it this way and that way and this way and that way. And so they started having focus groups, and the focus groups were examining the potential gamers book, comparing it to the regular book, and their focus group proved that they would have more success with the gamers book than even their normal regular world record book. So they said, "Mr. Day, we want to do this." And then as time went on and it came out, it became their book. And so we supplied them with stuff for many, many years so that it became a very popular book.
great. Wow, that's really exciting. I didn't know that you were so involved with actually creating an official book for video gamers.
Yeah. So I called up Guinness and contacted them and said, "Here's all the different ideas we should do." And I sent it to them. They liked it. We worked on it. And it came into the book. Became the book.
So, despite that you say you don't play so much anymore, do you still catch up with the recent developments, or did
Well,
you?
my trading cards are connected to the recent developments. Like if someone gets a world record, quite often they get put on a trading card.
Ah, interesting. How much trading cards does your collection have? Your set?
Well, so far we've printed almost 1,000 cards, 1,000 different cards, and we've laid out and designed hundreds and hundreds of more that haven't been printed yet.
Wow.
So, so it's a big collection. You can see all sorts of. If you go to Google and look up video game trading cards, in the images you'll see lots and lots of examples, samples of the trading card set I've done.
But it's all about players.
No, about historical things, about games, about companies, about events, about milestones,
Ah,
about technological breakthroughs, about pinball, about contest champions, uh, about
anything.
legendary industry people like Nolan Bushnell's on a card, uh, David Crane is on a card, Cliff Blazinski's on a card, Peter Moore's on a card, John Romero's on a card, uh, you know, um, Tommy Tallarico's on a card, Ralph Baer's on a card, and pretty soon George Rogan will be on a card.
Maybe, who knows? Maybe someday, because I interviewed all the big guys. Yeah. Well, that's interesting because when I was interviewing Alexei Pechetnov, the Tetris guy, he said, "Oh, I'm not really important." But I guess you even got a card about him?
No, no, I don't know how to locate him. If I knew how to locate him, I'd put him on a card because he has to prove it before I put him on a card.
How would he have to prove it?
So he'd have to say yes. He'd have to approve it.
Well, I mean, if you want, I have his email address.
That's nice. If you can connect this together, that might be very helpful. In fact, I would be open to you listing to me the 20 people that you've interviewed who you think should be on a trading card. Because we want to get everybody while they're still alive. And you might have ideas and contacts that we just simply haven't come across yet.
That's true.
It's easy to find everybody.
That's true. That's true. I'm really focused on getting everybody. Or another person would be Chris Crick, who was sound engineer and sound department leader of Epic Software. So he would be another guy. And Chris Crick, it took me 10 years to pull him, to get him, because there are so many Chris Cricks in California. It was hard to get the right guy. So if you like, I will make up a list about people I interviewed and I think should part trading cards.
Yeah. And what you should do is you should send me your mailing address because I will send you a bunch of the trading cards as a gift through the mail. So you'll have them there.
You mean physically?
I'll send you some physical cards.
Wow, that would be amazing, man.
I'll send you some cards. So you just send me your mailing address or your address in Germany.
So you are doing the trading cards. You are trying to get people there. Well, what else are you doing next to the music and the trading cards?
Music and trading cards.
Just the two things.
Well, I work as a landlord.
Still.
And also, in my hometown here, the town has 10,000 people here, and 4,000 of the people practice transcendental meditation. It's an actual meditation. You sit down and close your eyes, and according to doctors and scientists, it causes tremendously positive things to the health of your body, the health of your brain. It helps develop the personality. It removes deep-seated stress out of the nervous system and out of the brain and out of personality.
Wow.
And the health to physically and mentally and emotionally get better and better and better. So I do that every day too. In fact, I'm actually been hired as one of the people here who are part of a big scientific experiment where a bunch of people get together every day in a group and they practice transcendental meditation together in a group. And the scientists are measuring this because they believe that if enough people are doing this together in a group, it will actually influence how other people feel and how other people behave. And that according to some old writings, there had been a group of people doing this years and years and years ago who actually were influencing the environment in such that they were causing peace to be prevalent.
Really?
Very interesting. It's online. You can read about it all the time. I go into a big building called the Golden Dome, and there's thousands of people there, and together as a group, we practice transcendental meditation, and then the scientists measure different things to see how this influences trends in society and trends in the news.
Wow. This means if it improves health and mental development or something, you could be 100 years.
Could be. That's one of the theories is that this technique does help longevity.
Wow. Well, I mean, if you look at it, Ralph Baer's like 23 in April next year. He's one of the oldest still working pioneers so far.
Yep.
So yeah, well, great. Well, I have to admit this was all my questions I had for now.
Well, hold on one second. I'm going to walk away from the screen for a second. Okay?
Sure.
Okay. So this is what cards look like.
Wow.
So there's about 1,000 different ones. Like can you see that? That's a black and white one of Billy Mitchell.
Exactly. Yes.
And here's a guy from Norway.
Okay. Wow.
And you know who Heiko Gogolin is?
No, it doesn't ring a bell.
He used to be the editor of G Magazine.
Ah, okay.
So he's on a card too. And I think there's I think there's at least 4 or 5 different Germans who are on the card so far. So if you know anybody who's a champion German player too, I'd want to consider them on a card too.
Well, I'm friends with the record holder of Tetris single player mode on the Game Boy.
Oh,
He's German.
oh really? Okay, that would be a good one. That would be
Yeah.
good. You should get us connected.
Yeah, sure. So
Oh,
that's already two guys.
yeah,
Um, and I should mention next to you, we also have Stuart Chaffee from the Computer Chronicles.
that rings a bell. His name may have been brought up to me before. That does ring a bell.
Yeah, Computer Chronicles, you know, the historical computer game, well, no, computer show in America from 81 till 2002.
Hmm.
He's very famous. He brought computer news to the television
No,
before anybody else.
the name rings a bell, but I don't know him. I've never met him or talked to him. He sounds like a good one. That sounds actually, his career sounds very important.
He is.
It would be very nice on a card.
Okay, so I will get you in touch with some people. Storage phase shouldn't be a problem. I sent him an email and he replied within a couple of hours.
Very good.
Actually, the interesting thing is he is actually considering to restart the show, do it to Kickstarter.
Wow. I'll bet that'll work. I'll bet people will support that. That'll be
Yeah,
great.
yeah. Well, that's actually a good final question. What's your opinion about the Kickstarter thing and well using it for producing new retro games?
Well, a lot of people have done that very successfully. I'm very shy about using Kickstarter. It just feels like it causes it feels too. I think it makes the whole project a little bit too vulnerable to having too many people have a say. Or uh, I'm not even sure if I'm expressing correctly how I feel. It just feels like it's a little bit of a danger to use. But it'd be safer and simpler just to have private investors as opposed to having something open on the public like that. But I think it makes it too vulnerable and open for people attacking it or denouncing it or expressing negativity towards whatever project you're doing. And so I have refrained from using Kickstarter for any of my projects. People all the time tell me I should be using Kickstarter, but I seem to get by without using Kickstarter. But I think people have made it work.
Interesting. So actually you were suggested to do it. Um, so let me ask you this. If you were asked to take part in a project involving well, video game or arcade game history, would you say yes? Despite that you concentrate on music right now?
Well, it depends on how much of a commitment of time and energy it would take. So that's the only answer I could give now.
How much does your music take of your energy and time?
Well, soon it's going to take 90% of it because I'm not just writing music. I'm going to be writing a musical. You know what a music like Broadway, a Broadway musical?
Seriously?
I'm writing a Broadway musical. And I'm in the process of writing what's called the book, which is the story and the lyrics and finishing the music and developing just the whole dynamics of the musical. So I'm writing an actual musical. And it's based on my experience opening up TwinGalaxies back in 1981. It's about the experience of having a small town suddenly become the center of the video game world. And so we'll see how it turns out. It's very challenging because it requires probably a lot more intelligence than I have. A lot more creativity than I have. But that's why I love it so much, because it's so extremely demanding and challenging for me to actually pull this off and make this happen and do this musical and hopefully do it right so that it's good and people enjoy it, that it's making me have to think smarter and get better and better and better. It's almost like a basketball team or a soccer team. When they go and play the best team in the world, their own gameplay gets better and better and better because they rise to meet the challenge. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So it's rise to meet the challenge. So this is so challenging for me that I'm having to rise to meet the challenge, to think intelligently and creatively enough to actually make a musical that works and that will be a success. So that's why it's such an exciting, fun thing for me, and it's the most important thing I'll be doing. But the trading cards, as I show you here, I love these too. They're so much fun. And the whole theme about the trading cards, by the way, and this is why you could become important for me in this, the whole theme is that the cards were created to commemorate. You know the word commemoration? To commemorate the history of the global video game and pinball culture, honoring the important industry pioneers, honoring the famous champions, honoring the important events, and the landmark milestones. So it's a very, very big set that we want to make it so historically important that eventually it could be hung up in a museum and people would come to see it as an educational experience.
Well, talking about history, there are several discussions and flaws in history. I remember that until Brian Becknell released his book called The Rise of Fall of Commodore, actually people before thought that Apple produced the first affordable home computers, while it was actually Commodore. And the second thing that was also discussed a lot is if Nolan was the one who invented home video gaming or Ralph Baer. So what's your personal opinion about those conflicts in history, as you are a historian?
Well, I think most people think that Ralph Baer invented it, of course. And as for the Commodore or the Apple, because I've read neither of those, I've not read any of those books. So therefore, I personally don't have an opinion on it because I'm not at all studied up on it. I haven't studied it. However, here's the way history seems to work. Or here's the way the appreciation of history seems to work. Right now, as things move further and further and further away, here's an event, and as time moves further and further and further away from it, more people start presenting their side of the story, And so as you get further and further away from it, you have more access to more of the historical facts than were available immediately after the thing happened. So as history gets farther and farther away from it, you have a bigger vista, a bigger view of all the historical ramifications of what actually happened. Because right now, maybe 4 or 5 more people come forward over the next few years and tell their inside story of what they saw happen at Apple or at Commodore. And as that gets added to the information database, it gets easier to have a more balanced and more complete and more correct perspective on what historically happened. So I personally don't worry about it right now, because as the years go on, they'll get the story more correct and more correct as time goes on, until finally the story will be the true story. Because initially, people have their biases, they have their emotional attachments, and quite often they cover up what really happened, because either they're ashamed of it or they don't really know the complete story, probably for many reasons. But historically, as you get further and further in time, it's like a river. When you go down the river, more and more tributaries feed the river, more and more rivers. So more and more rivers of information get added to that big mainstream of information, so that the story begins to sort itself out. if you give it enough time.
Mm.
So
But the,
I don't know where it's at right now, all these arguments, but it will solve itself as time goes on.
so how do you approach it as a historian? Do you not care who is correct, or?
Oh, the thing is who's ever correct is correct. And so I'm going to allow it to decide itself that way.
Hmm. But the problem is, if you look at it, you are one of the younger pioneers. Most people I interviewed are in their 80s or 90s or almost 80s.
Yeah,
But
you come from the era of actually the development of the computer. I come as part of a group of people who's not part of the technology. I and my group of people, we were the king of the users. We were the king of the actual people who were the gamers. We represented the voice of the hundreds of millions of people who were using the games, who came after the earlier group of people figured out how to make the games. So you are completely right. Those are older people who came out of the technology field, who have a technology background, and who they figured out how to do computers and how to adapt them to gameplay and then make all the technology connected to that. Whereas I'm connected to the huge group of people who were the users who actually played the game, grew off as an appendage off of that big group of people who were the technologists. And they were all older. They were all older because many of them had long careers already in the field of technology.
that's true. So, well, this problem will be still that if you say history will sort out by itself, it could be a problem if in 20 years those people are not around anymore.
Well, that's part of the process. Part of the process is people like Jörg Droog who go out and interview these people and have them tell some of their most important memoirs. It still has to be, though, that someone has to interview them and someone has to write about them and they have to tell their story. That's still part of the process. They do have to give their memoirs. They have to give their story so that it all fits into the big historical tapestry. Okay? So you're right there, but I think I'm also right too. As soon as everybody's story gets out completely, then the historical picture will be easier and clearer to understand.
Hmm.
But they have to be interviewed. See, I used to be a ragtime piano player. You know what ragtime is? Ragtime piano? Scott
N-
Joplin.
not really. I don't know what ragtime piano is. No.
See the movie The Sting?
Yes, I think I did. Yeah.
For that kind of old-fashioned piano music? That was called ragtime music. And anyway, someone wrote a book on ragtime piano in 1949. And it happened that they wrote that book at the last possible moment they could write it, because many of the people they interviewed who had been part of ragtime around the year 1900, many of those people died immediately after the book was published. So the
Wow.
author interviewed them just in the nick of time, as they say in English, just in time. And like what you're doing is very important because you have to get these people interviewed now because you don't know how long they're going to be around. And their story is very important and very instrumental in telling the big story, in giving the big picture. So what you're doing is a part of the historical process. And that's why we have fun with these cards, because we're bringing out in this play fashion on these cards little historical stories that otherwise might be overlooked by the history books.
So actually, your hobby and your fun thing has a greater meaning.
Yeah, it has a greater meaning. I'm a historian.
That's really interesting. I'm sure most people didn't think of that when they hear the word, when they hear the name Walter Day, that you are doing such a big thing nowadays.
Well, when you think about it, if you think about it, what was I really doing 30 some years ago? I was documenting the history of competitive video game playing, turning it into a historical tapestry that grew into being a competitive organized sport.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. So that's your next thing. You will do your cards until you got everybody who is important.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm relying on you to help me too.
Oh, sure, sure, I will do that. So,
No, actually, your help could genuinely prove out to be very valuable. So I appreciate it.
well, I don't know. I mean, if you have any connections to the industry about them people who could be interviewed.
So what you should do is you should send me a list of people you're trying to connect with, and I'll see if I can help you too. Okay?
Sure. And I will message you my email address here in Skype.
Okay.
So you should have received it now.
Okay.
Did you
Okay.
receive the message?
Well, I'm at a different computer. I have to walk.
Ah,
I have to walk back to my main office.
okay. Well, I can also send it. I can also send it on Facebook now. It's no problem. Anyway, it's interesting because I tried to add you to Facebook a week ago, but it said you had 3,000 friends and couldn't handle any friends anymore. But today
So,
it was possible.
well, here's what it is. I have two accounts. One of them is Walter Day, and one of them is Walter Aldro Day Jr. The one for Walter Day has 5,000 people, and I can't add a single other person. The one for Walter Aldro Day Jr., I don't know what it has, maybe 3,000. And that one still adds people. So that's what you probably did. You probably joined me on the second one.
No, I joined you on the first one on Walter Day today. You
Oh,
just
okay. I
confirmed.
know what happened. I know what happened. I have a big, 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 big long list of people who are trying to join me. Okay? You know how you click up there and you see the list? And it happens that every so many days, someone will drop off and it becomes 4,999 people.
Wow.
What I did is I clicked on the list and saw you at the top of the list, and I clicked on it and it added you back and you became the 5,000th person again.
Interesting. Yeah, because it happened while you were actually talking to me.
Wow, okay. So I clicked on it before I came over to the screen, but it added you afterwards. Okay, so you're number 5,000 right now.
Wow. But I thought it was 3,000. No?
No, the limit is 5,000.
But the error message said 3,000.
Then then I don't know why the error message said that. I think there was an error message in the error message.
Yeah, interesting.
Because
So,
because if I go over there right now and I click on someone and try and add them, I'll get a message that says, "Oh, you can't add this person because you already have 5,000 people, and that's the limit." So I see that limit every single day, so I know it's correct that the
wow.
5,000 is the limit.
Wow.
So I don't know why the error message said 3,000. I don't know.
Okay. So I sent you on the normal account, on the Walter Day account, my email address, so you can check it out.
This,
Definitely.
this I think, is the longest interview I've ever done in years. I think we're at an hour and a half, aren't we?
Well, we are at 2 hours almost.
Okay, wow.
My
Did I?
longest one was at 3 hours. So,
Okay, wow. Well, this is good. Well, thank you very much.
thank
And
you.
be sure to send me your address, and
Sure.
we will continue to interact, okay?
Okay, we will stay in touch.
Thank you. Bye bye
Yeah,
now.
bye bye.
Bye bye.